Good morning and welcome. I'm Noeline Pereira, lawyer and activist, privileged to host today's panel discussion. A warm welcome to you, Dr. Ranil Senanayaka.
Thank you.
One of our pioneering environmentalists who's here from Colombo, who's going to be sharing his views today. A warm welcome to Professor Piyadasa Edrisuriya.
Thank you.
And a very warm welcome to you, Professor Sivi Hettige, also visiting Melbourne. We are at a very historic juncture in Sri Lankan politics. With the recent election, both the presidential and the general election, the government today has been elected with a mandate. 159 out of 225 seats have been won. We finally have a government who has a 2/3 majority in the parliament, which means there is now the opportunity to bring about the system change that the people have been crying out for. How is the government going to direct this path is the next question. A lot of us wants to understand what the present government's policy initiatives are going to be. With sustainable development being our priority at this point in time, are we geared from a policy point of view to achieve that target? To open this discussion, I would like to invite Professor Edrisuriya to give a brief synopsis and tell us where we are at right now from an economic point of view, give us a bit of an overview on the collapse that we experienced in recent times, and how he sees this to be an opportunity to come out of this situation that we are in.
Thank you. Thank you, Noeline. Actually, since the government came to power, nothing significant has happened, but I think they are on the way to deliver what they have been telling us during the election campaign. We are in this situation because of the previous governments, not only one government, number of governments actually manage our economy in a bad way. So in simple word, it's mismanagement, economic mismanagement. So because of economic mismanagement, we were in a situation where we could not honor our debt payments, and at the end we had to declare bankruptcy. So with this situation, it's not happened overnight, but a number of things that the governments did in many years have contributed to this situation, including exchange rate policies, where they mismanaged the exchange rate. So they had a kind of exchange rate which the government wanted people to see as a stable exchange rate, but in reality it was not. And also corruptions. There were many areas where the corruption was playing a significant role, and as a result of that, public funds have been mismanaged or taken by corrupt officials and politicians. And also there were some external factors which were contributing to this situation, things like COVID-19 situation, where I know the government was trying very hard, but still they could not, not only the Sri Lankan government, many countries had this problem. And also the government, previous governments have been taking short-term loans, debts. So these were really not good things, because if you are borrowing short-term, then you must be able to pay them during the short term. But the government did not have such plans. And also all of these things have led the current government to persuade people to vote for them, and they promise to have a better economic management, better people-oriented system in the country. So I think they have laid the foundation, and hopefully within next few years they could be able to do something, hopefully. And so far things are happening in an expected way, and there are some issues, but I don't think that they are significant at this stage. We have to wait and see.
Professor, some of the key economic indicators, if we were to look at some of the key economic indicators like our GDP per capita and trade deficit as well as our national debt, how big is our problem?
National debt is a significant one, but that's why we are having this debt restructuring program. Not only the external debt, but the local debt as well. So, to manage the debt, we should have a proper revenue management mechanism. We need to increase the revenue, we need to increase the taxes. Increase in taxes means that not you are charging everybody the same way, but there are areas where the government can take action. For example, there are some professionals, they earn significant amount of money doing private practices, etc., but they are not being taxed properly. And also, for example, tuition teachers and these kind of people, they do not declare properly their income. So that's not their fault, but there's no mechanism to do that. So I think we should have a proper mechanism to address all these issues. So that's why the government is initiating this so-called digital economy. So they are digitizing the whole thing. So with this, we may be able to increase the revenue, manage the revenue, and widen the tax base, and eventually, not in the very short period, but eventually we may be able to manage our national debt level and also increase the GDP.
Professor, you were part of the Ministry of Finance when our economy was opened. Neoliberalism, capitalism, these are the concepts that we went with over the last 30-something years. Unfortunately, we saw the collapse, the near collapse of the state, the collapse of the economy as a result of embracing some of those principles. Do we owe it to those principles, or as you say, it was the mismanagement of the economy that is principally the reason for the collapse that we had to endure?
We can say that is one of the reasons, because that was not the only reason, because when we opened the economy in 1977, it was not done in a proper way. Simply like opening a floodgate, without doing any sort of management. So we should have opened the economy in a proper way, systematic way, looking at the domestic economy, and where the some of the products were very competitive at that time. So with the opening of the economy, what happened was very cheap imports started flooding in the country, and there were no controls or no restrictions. At the same time, there were no proper program to help the domestic producers to increase their production and manage the these free imports. So in a way, government did not have a proper sort of mechanism to balance this domestic economy production as well as the international, or rather imports flooding into the country. So I think that was not managed well. I don't think that opening up the economy was a mistake. We were needed at that time, but we should have done it in a systematic way rather than just opening it up.
The last 30 years we have experienced almost a collapse of our manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector is almost non-existent in Sri Lanka. Would you not say that it is the globalization as well as the opening of the economy that actually caused the collapse of the manufacturing sector in Sri Lanka, which has increased our reliance on imports? overall?
Of course, it's not only in Sri Lanka. All over the world, we can say that the domestic industries were in trouble with the competition coming from the overseas countries. So if we can give an example from Australia, maybe 30 years ago we had a number of car manufacturing plants, and they were manufacturing these cars and for the local market as well as for import. But eventually, at the moment, there are no car manufacturing companies in Australia. So it's not only in Sri Lanka, it was a problem for many countries. But just because that some of the inefficient manufacturing plants are closing down because they could not face the competition, that doesn't mean that the globalization is bad. So we have to have a kind of economic policies to address this globalization issues, because if we do not have competitive better products to our local economy, the ultimate sort of price is going to be paid by the customers. So you are buying inefficient, bad product at a high price, whereas there are very cheap, very good, efficient products produced by other countries. So this is why we need to have a sort of a proper plan to address these issues. So I think I mentioned this in the beginning, that when we opened the economy, we just did that like without any analysis or any sort of plans. But we can actually manage this. We could have managed some of our manufacturing industries which are now being closed down. So in this situation, government could have given subsidies, and through that they could have managed this, because we know that the countries like South Korea, so the so-called chaebols or those big companies, many years they were making losses, and they could not compete with the rest of the world. But government kept on providing subsidies, so at the end, so they have become global leaders now. So why not we can't do that? We can do that, but you should have a proper plan for that.
Do you see the improvement in the rupee as a sign that there's increased faith in the government? Is that an obvious sort of statement on my part?
At the moment, yes, rupee's value is a little bit stable, but this is because not our economy has sort of significant changes or improvement. This is because we are getting a lot of funds from the IMF and the World Bank and other places, and also remittances are now, we are getting significant remittances. So still, we don't see that rupee has strengthened. Maybe day-to-day trading, the value has stabilized, but we need to go a long way to have a stable rupee.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Hettige, hearing what Professor Surya has just explained to us, and the discussion around the changes in the economy over the last 4 decades, would you say that one of the key issues is that sustainability was not really central to the policy making when it came to developing the economy?
Well, the point is the economic situation, as he described quite well, has been transformed over the last 4 decades, and we have seen how it has also impacted on the other sectors. So I think we probably have to look at it from a holistic angle, because for instance, when you have this kind of a change, it has ramifications in all the other sectors. Say for instance, when you look at the labor market, the employment situation, and that has actually changed quite drastically. In other words, we had fairly balanced, I would say a fairly balanced economy until then. Of course, it was not a developed economy, it was not a economy that generated, what the people needed in terms of well-paid employment and improved services and so on and so. But on the other hand, what we have seen is that the collapse of industrial employment basically created unemployment, but that unemployment was somehow balanced by creating a very vast informal sector. In fact, when you look at the distribution of our labor across sectors, you can see that very clearly. Now, for instance, if you take the formal sector, that is basically private sector, and the government sector, you have only about 40%. 60% of the people ended up in informal kind of employment, both in rural areas as well as in urban areas. So now this, of course, is a major problem, because when you have irregular employment, you have serious social issues, like, for instance, income insecurity, then lack of social protection, and then incomes basically being very variable, and so on and so forth. So the point is that this situation actually created a lot of unrest. What I basically emphasized was that the economic change that our colleague described has had very significant ramifications in all sectors. And I think that is important, because as far as the people are concerned, the structural change in the economy is rather abstract. I think for them, what really matters is how it impacts on their own lives and life chances. So the point is that with the decline of industrial production, both big and small, that led to unemployment, particularly in rural areas, because we had industrial factories established across the country. So when these industries collapsed, naturally unemployment was created. And then, of course, the imports basically also impacted on even rural industries, and of course including agriculture. So the point is that this situation led to unemployment, and then of course it was balanced by the expansion of the urban and rural informal sector. In other words, more and more people got into informal employment and livelihood activities. Now the fact of the matter is that formal employment is very critical, because when you have formal employment, it's not only that you have income stability, employment security, you also have social protection. Now in the case of Sri Lanka, what we have seen is that the formal sector has not expanded. Instead, the informal sector has expanded. So much so that we have about 60% of the people basically deriving their income from informal economic activities, both in rural and urban areas. Now unemployment of course was a major issue, and the government at that time, this did not take long. Actually, already in the 1980s, felt that we have to somehow find employment in other countries, and they established the Foreign Employment Bureau with a view to facilitating out migration of people who were struggling. And then of course we had this massive outflow of workers going to the Middle East initially, and later on of course to also the East Asian countries, and also some countries in the European region. Now the point is that when you have such a massive out-migration, it has of course social economic benefits. Naturally they send remittances, and those remittances could be used to meet various needs, like for instance paying for what you import. But on the other hand, you have the downside, and that is actually people basically having to manage their various other issues in the countryside, under various pressures, like for instance unemployment rate has gone down partly because of this massive out-migration. Like for instance, there was a time when we had something like 1.8 million people out of 8.4, I mean 8.5 million labor force. So which means that nearly a quarter of our labor force was employed outside. But then this was perceived as a relief by the government because it reduced the unemployment problem to considerable extent. But at the same time, the money that was sent was a blessing in disguise because that money could be used to pay for increasing imports. Now that is about employment. Now the other, of course, is the social sectors. Now social sectors also underwent very, very significant transformation. Now take for instance the education sector. Because in Sri Lanka, education is considered as very important by almost everyone, because they think that, well, the future depends on your educational attainment, and therefore parents even in remote rural areas would consider education as the way forward, and not only for the children but also for their own future, because these people with education will find better employment, and that would probably provide social security in their old age and so on and so forth. But then we know that education sector became so unequal with the emergence of private education, particularly the establishment of international schools, and that actually attracted people with higher incomes. But then the problem was that the education sector was underfunded, and it became more and more so over time. Now, for instance, I remember in the early 70s, we had something like 3% of the GDP being allocated for education. Now, for the last several decades, it has been half of that, actually 1.5%. Now, when you have 1.5% of the GDP allocated for education, it's a major problem. When you look at it from a broader international point of view, today in East Asia, in many countries, you have over 5%, 5 to 7% of the GDP allocated for education. But the fact of the matter is that how can you allocate 5% for education when your state revenue is around 10 to 12%. That's the point. I say we had something like 30% of. The state revenue was about 30% of the. Like we had something like. We had a very high percentage of the GDP going for state revenue, like 30% of the GDP, and that actually was useful in the initial years when public education, public transport, and also of course public health were so critical for most people, not just in rural areas but also in urban areas. So the point is, education sector became more and more unequal, and the people who were very much affected were in the rural areas, and they had a hard time because their schools were not really well resourced, and therefore they were forced to rely on private tuition and so on and so forth, and that became a very major burden on even rural poor households. And finally, of course, health sector. Health sector, was so critical in Sri Lanka in the initial phase of economic and social development. In fact, in Sri Lanka, high life expectancy was very much the result of a good health system, where public health was considered very, very important. But whereas we have seen over time, the health sector has also become highly unequal and then also underfunded. So the point is that that society became more and more polarized between, let's say, the rich and the poor. Now, when you look at the income distribution in the country, you can see that. Now, I looked at some of the data, and I realized that income distribution has been unequal for many, many years. I don't have time to go into it, but like for instance, if you look at the lowest 10% of income earners, they had less than 2% of the income, national income. But whereas compared to let's say the the highest income earners, like for instance the highest 10%, is something like 35% of the income. So you can see the distribution, income distribution has become more and more unequal during this period. Now that certainly has a huge impact on the quality of life of low income people, and also the life chances, you see, and also access to public services and so on and so forth. So, and I think the main point I think I want to emphasize is that public services that dominated the service sector gave way to private, services, health, education and transport. And as you can see, public transport sector is very much dominated by, transport sector is very much dominated by private transport today. Whereas, let's say, I remember in the 60s and the 70s, it was very much tilted towards public transport. And the same is true for health and education as well. So I think we have to look at all these various other areas for us to understand the gravity of the economic transition that took place after 77 that he elaborated on. And then the other thing is, of course, rural-urban migration. I mean, that is very, very significant, because we had in the 1970s maintained a balance between rural and urban population. In fact, about 80% of our people were living in the countryside, in rural areas. But whereas today you can see, some of the urban centers have become, magnets for people, basically flowing into these places and basically looking for, income, sources, as well as, access to services. Like, if you are living close to an urban center, you have better access to health. If you are living close to an urban center, you have better access to education and so on. So you have a situation where both the poor and the rich, started sort of moving away from rural areas, and they congregated in urban center. Now Colombo, I remember, in the 1960s, we had something like 350,000 people. 300. I mean, rather, 3.3. Yeah, I think Colombo population was very small. But whereas urban population has really increased so rapidly over time. So as a result, urban centers have become unmanageable, unsustainable. I mean, Colombo is certainly unsustainable, because when you look at the kind of green spaces in the Colombo metropolitan region, they have dwindled over time, and that has created a lot of environmental problems and health issues and so on and so forth. So even if you look at some of the epidemics like dengue and so on and so forth, and you have a very large concentration of dengue in the Colombo metropolitan region. So I think these are all things that have to be taken into consideration when we are looking at the challenges that we are facing. So in other words, it's not just economic development. Economic development is so critical, but of course it is sustainable economic development and balanced economic development. But at the same time, you have to figure out what happens to other sectors, and I think those sector policies are as important as economic policy. So we have to naturally have a sound economic policy, how to restructure this economy to have a balance.
Professor, yes, sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned that one of the main reasons why we have such a reduced spending on critical areas like education, health, infrastructure, transport, etc. is because we don't have the state revenue at sufficient levels. State income is not at sufficient levels. How do you see the need for changes in tax policy to address that issue? Isn't that one of the first things that the government will have to look at to address that?
Yes, I think the point is that you have to rationalize the taxation system in the sense that taxation system should be equitable. In other words, now we have a situation where those who have regular incomes, they are naturally covered by the taxation system. They have to pay, and like for instance, people who earn over 100,000 rupees even in public institutions are covered. I mean, they have to pay taxes and so on. But when we have this massive informal sector, where I don't know whether there is much space for increasing taxes there, because the point is that people who are engaged in informal sector economic activities, they do not really earn regular incomes, and they do not earn very high incomes and so on and so forth. But of course, there are people who do small business and so on and so forth. They might probably earn enough money to be entitled, I mean, not rather liable for income tax, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, it is the structure of the economy that is reflected in the taxation structure. Now, for instance, I know that there is certainly room for bringing more and more people into the tax net, but the fact of the matter is that we have a huge gap between the developed countries and the developing countries, particularly between, let's say, like more liberal, neoliberal countries on the one hand, and social democratic countries like for instance the Northern Europe and so on. The proportion of let's say the GDP going into government revenue, it is really very, very different. I mean, like for instance, if you take some of the Northern European countries like Sweden, Finland and so on and so forth, you have a high proportion, over 45% of the the national wealth going into government revenue, which means with 45% of state revenue, what you can do anything. I mean, you can put 5% into education, you can put even 7%, 8%, I don't know, and then you can certainly invest in public transport systems, and so on and so forth, and that might necessarily be entirely public. But the point is that you can invest in social infrastructure, and the health, I think, is so critical. I mean in Sri Lanka, as I already mentioned, we had something like 30% of the GDP going as state revenue some decades ago, like the early 1970s, whereas it has come down steadily over the last 4 decades, and it hit rock bottom a few years ago at 8% of the GDP. With 8% of the GDP, what can you do? What can you do to improve public services and investing in infrastructure? So the point is that we are basically in a very bad way in terms of let's say the capacity of the state to really respond to a lot of these issues. So, of course, there are other issues that we have to take into consideration, like for instance, other political issues like the politicization of the entire institutional fabric. I mean, that is a major problem because, modern institutions have to be organized rationally, based on,
function.
Whatever, principles that should guide those institutions. But the point is that when you really politicize institutions, they become dysfunctional. And we know that politicization happened not just in a few areas, but even our universities were politicized. So, I mean, that is the last place that one would expect a government to politicize. But on the other hand, that is what happened. So I think the point is that I think, what we are faced with is not just a sectoral issue. We are faced with a kind of all-encompassing, let's say holistic, kind of a situation where we have to figure out how to balance, different, the concerns and so on and so forth. I mean, I did not mention the environmental issue, ecological problems that we have to grapple with, and I think certainly our colleague would deal with that. But I have a feeling that we have to, streamline our public institutions. The state apparatus has to be, we talk about, we talk about, meritocracies in East Asia, but we have had mediocrities for so long in this country. I mean, the mediocrities as against meritocracies. But we know that we have been talking about formal organizations. Formal organizations are formal organizations. It's rule-based. And there are standards that we have to maintain. But the point is that in Sri Lanka, our institutions, have become more and more informal. Like you can, interfere into the functioning of, institutions through various informal ways, not just political alone. I mean, so I don't want to go into that. But so the institutional fabric has to be revamped, and I think that's a major challenge. And the other one is, of course, the policy process. We know that the world over, there are certain, principles, certain ideas that guide the policy process. And I know that from the UNESCO, they have come up with so many, policy ideas. Like, for instance, and maybe just give you a couple of examples. We have to have evidence-based policies. The policy, research and policy nexus is so critical, because you can't take ad hoc decisions. You have to be guided by evidence. That is what a medical doctor would do if a patient come to his room, and he would naturally look at evidence. That is, I mean, if a person is not well, you have to find out, what is the problem and what is the cause of that problem.
And then only policy making.
So I think this principle applies across the board, and I think in this country we have neglected this very one. And the other one, of course, is the management of change.
Professor, you always talk about taking advantage of low-hanging fruit. Mm-hmm. That's an expression that we hear you use often. How do you see that we can actually take advantage of some of these opportunities for immediate improvement, mm-hmm. to cut spending, to maybe widen the tax net and bring in more revenue? Do you see that as low-hanging fruit, or do you see that such change is going to jeopardize perhaps the popularity of the government, because these are sweeping changes we are talking about?
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very good point, and I think while we have to address the structural problems that our colleague, already explained, and then of course, turning to, the environmental kind of issue, that is really something that we have to take care of. But on the other hand, these things are not going to deliver anything to the ordinary person on the street, anything, in the short run. So the point is that, like the structural change in the economy is so critical, but that will take time. I mean, you can put a figure if you like. It might take 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, I don't know what. But the point is that people who have been really at the forefront in this particular change that we have witnessed in Sri Lanka are the people who have been under enormous pressure. And actually, if not for this massive economic crisis that impacted on the large majority of lowest, half of the population, right? We wouldn't have seen this change, because the point is that they were, being, under normal circumstances, they could be persuaded to fall in line with any ideology. They could be, influenced by various forces, religious, nationalists and all these people. And in fact, Sri Lankan population has been driven by these forces, and particularly the media and so and so. But the point is, once, you are hit at the right place, that is the stomach, then, when you are really under enormous pressure to meet the day-to-day needs of your children and family and sick and all these. The point is, then you forget about ideology. You forget about all these concerns that other groups have articulated. But they basically responded in a very big way. So the point is that that this transformation is very much driven by the lower half of the population, and they were very much taken for a ride over many years by various forces. But this time, because we had this massive crisis, and that really disrupted the day-to-day lives of the people. Like when the buses are not running, how can they take a patient to a hospital? How can they send when the children schools are closed, when transport is not, how can they, and then when they have to run around looking for work, how can they do it when there's no way of moving around? So the point is that really made the change, but it doesn't mean that ideas are not important. And of course, good ideas are very important. While we are, working on these good ideas to, really promote, sustainable development, environmental quality, and then of course other things like social justice and so on and so forth, law and order, all these things, we have to deliver something now. And I think that's why we have to figure out how to reach out to these people and, mobilize them, provide them with what is absolutely necessary for them to get on with their lives. I think that is what we should be focusing attention on. And I think we probably have to have a major program, at a community level, across the country, not just in, certain areas, across the country. And I think that is possible because we had a background to this kind of thing in the past. In fact, we had at a community level, rural development societies where the people, they were empowered and they were sitting, and we had the cooperative movement that brought people together and so on. One served a lot of the needs of the people and so on. And then, and different groups are organized like women and youth and so on. So the point, and the farmers and so on. But the point is, now we have to start thinking about how we could do community empowerment. In other words, to get these people involved in the management of local affairs, not national affairs, local affairs. In other words, if you go to any part of the country, you will realize that there are so many issues that can be tackled at that level through the local institutions. I mean, we have an institutional fabric spreading, across the country, going from top to bottom, like to the village level. I mean, for instance, we have institutions. But the point is now we have to get these institutions to respond to some of these things, but then we need to also get the people, organized and empowered. So community, empowerment, I think, should be a major priority, and that will give them the impression that we are back in, in business, and we are in a position now to, take decisions on our own local affairs.
You sound very positive and very
and then the other thing is, of course, we have to also establish, I mean, I have seen in many countries, including Australia, where they have established, neighborhood centers where people could, walk into, not, drive into, but walk into, because it's so close to where the people live. And I think those centers can actually, be the focal point for delivering, very basic services that the ordinary people need. It may be, primary, healthcare services, or something to help with, let's say the disabled people, and then the young people, and then, children, the women, and so on and so forth. So the point is that it would be possible for us to, have a community-based, program across the country that would, address the pressing issues that the people are faced with. And I think that would send a message to the people who have responded politically now, that there is, some hope that we are being, taken care of, and our issues are being addressed, at our doorstep, not in Colombo. So the point is that the institutions have to also change. And now, of course, as you know, a lot of the things are driven by institutions in Colombo, whether it is child protection or elderly care or, disability care, whatever. I mean, all driven by, but whereas these are things that should be taken to the people. And I think these are not big issues. I think you can actually do
tackle
that. So I think, so the point is that if you can really have a program that would be implemented at a local level, a community level, And if this can be actually monitored and interventions can be fashioned in line with, the changes that are happening, then, people will, naturally be quite, pleased with the change that has taken place. So the point is, how can this change that has taken place at the national level touch the lives of the people? I think that is what we should do, and I think that is where we need a kind of a global compact, global initiative. I mean, I would call it, transnational social solidarity, because, solidarity we talk about in a country, within a country. But whereas, given the fact that we have, very large, population, Sri Lankan population scattered all over the country, and then they are in very different, situations in their own places of residence, domicile. I think there's a need for a kind of new way of defining social solidarity, and that's why I call it transnational social solidarity, because it is social solidarity that has protected the lower half of the population in many countries. I know, I have experience in a number of countries in Europe where social solidarity is what matters. Actually, this progressive taxation system is the clearest manifestation of social solidarity. In other words, people contribute not because they are required by law. They contribute because they know that they have a responsibility to the other. And I think that sense of social solidarity has to be revived in Sri Lanka. And in fact, we are an atomized society today. We are a segmented society today. And it is necessary for us to bring all these segments and atomized people together, and then give them a sense of pride and also a sense of collective well-being.
Thank you so much, Professor, for articulating the situation so well and actually being so optimistic and showing a way forward. Ranil,
Yes.
Ranil, environmental policy making, Professor Hettige went to explain at length why it's important that policy be research-driven, research-based policy making. In my personal view, I don't see that to be the case when it comes to the environment and environmental issues in Sri Lanka. What are your views on that issue?
All right. Let me talk to that then. Let me start actually with the national goals and where we went. I'd like to point out something that is the founding father of Sri Lanka, D.S. Senanayake. He had a view as to what success in his government was. He said, the performance of my government has to be judged by the larder of the poorest of our homes. We lost that. All of a sudden, people came in and it changed from a social goal into an economic goal, GDP, all that happened. So we changed focus and we lost our humanity at that point. There's something else. See, biologically speaking, all systems, biological systems, all living systems, whether it be a human being, bacterium, a tree or plant, we have what are called fixed thresholds. You have too much heat, you die. You have too little heat, you die. You have too much water, you die. You have too little water, you die. Same thing for every substance. We, all biological beings, live on fixed thresholds. But the planning for these biological beings is done by a system called economics, which has flexible thresholds. Using discount rates, you can move it. So a thing doesn't crash because, oh, yeah, we got a discount rate. So you got this thinking of flexible thresholds being put on a world of inflexible thresholds. And my God, we have got problems as a consequence. Now, there's something else. This whole business of development, which means, first, in the fundamental sense, as a Sri Lankan, right, what is development? It is the creation of desire, krodha. because you have to, if you have one, it's not enough, you have to have two. If you have two, because we need turnover in the bank. Now, in a Buddhist society, what has Buddha told us about krodha and desire? He said there is only one consequence, dukkha. Knowing that, we go and stick our heads into it. All right? Now, in the 70s, it started out, we're going to join the world kind of business, right? And I remember the government at that time had a communique in the papers that said, oil means more development. Less oil, less development, more oil, more development. It's oil that keeps the wheels of development turning. Right? What is this? Oil is an energy substance. We based all that on this fossil energy. Today we know that it's a fossil energy that's destroying the planet. Yet we, like drug addicts, are hooked to the supply of energy for everything in this country. Whether it be transport, whether it be health, agriculture, all of it depends on external energy. Now let me look at external energy and look at agriculture and see what happened. We were totally energy independent in terms of agricultural productivity. Then along comes the green revolution. Oh yeah, we're going to double the crop. And economists, oh yeah. We forget one, that energy was hugely subsidized out there. Secondly, when we, as an ecologist, a fundamental axiom of ecology is energy flow through a system tends to simplify and organize that system. And that's what happened to agriculture. All the diversity that supported agriculture was gone. So that without the input, we could not produce. We are like the drug addict. Our fields were like the drug addict, right? You can't remove the input, you have no productivity. So we painted ourselves into a deadly corner here. And along with that, what happened? Our farming population has one of the largest incidences of cancer, incidences of thalassemia, happening all through agricultural community. Why? Development of agriculture. Also, if you look at what's happening with agriculture today in the NCP, something is turning up, and that is thalassemias, cancers are turning up in the age bracket 1 to 15. As people have pointed out, there is no way that these toxins can accumulate in that time unless it happened when you are in the womb of your mother. We are poisoning our children in their mother's wombs, and we are not paying any attention to that. The National Cancer Control Program, look at the statistics. Statistics are manipulated to show that they don't take agrochemicals into consideration. It is disastrous what is happening to our country. And everybody is shuffling around, hiding this, hiding that, hiding the other thing, because we need economic development. They're destroying our nation.
Is there any effort to build some national consensus on this issue? Do you see that there is any effort? Or has there been any movement in that direction?
Well, I have yet to see. I'll tell you another interesting thing with the politicians. Now, let's look at clean and healthy agriculture. Organic agriculture. All right? I went from Australia to Sri Lanka as the inspector for organic agriculture and certified the first estate in Sri Lanka, which is Needwood Estate of 40 hectares. Right. As organic, and then trade began. In the next 20-25 years, we moved that from 40 hectares of certified organic land, production land, to 42,000. And then along comes, who's that? Rajapaksa, who was the president?
Gotabaya
Rajapaksa, right? And his gang, and his bureaucrats around him say, "Oh, sir, this agriculture, this fertilizer subsidy is huge. Look, all these thousands of hectares of land is now in organic. We can go organic." And the idiots, right, said, "Oh yeah, the whole country," without realizing the rest of the country is addicted to this stuff. They created a social problem, they created a political problem, they created a health problem.
Did they consult the environmentalists before they changed the country's agriculture policy overnight?
I think something else interesting, right? Because when I started off, I joined the Mahavalley and found there were a bunch of crooks. And the minister was there. Of course, I was thrown out as a consequence, right? Because I pointed out the corruption. Now, as a consequence, I am the only systems ecologist in the country, I think in South Asia. But up to today, I have not been invited once for any government discussion, not consulting, no nothing about the environment and about that impact in Sri Lanka. Because the bureaucrats are fearful of somebody who speaks the truth. So I have to work outside Sri Lanka in other countries as a consultant and then bring the money back home to do my work. I mean, this is the kind of situation we have in our country. It's tragic, but it should not stop us from every day trying to make the change. So, in the words of Gandhi, who says, "Be the example you want the world to be," I left the city, I moved out into the country, I live in Beragala, right, creating what I think Sri Lanka should be doing. The only way we can teach is teach by example, no other.
This is Beragala where you have your research happening?
No, that's Belipola.
Belipola.
Belipola. Because that happened, also a story, as I was in the ministry, Mahavalley ministry, right, I was fighting in the forest department, saying, "Why are you planting these monocultures of pinus and eucalyptus? It's no good to any of us. Nothing happens here, there's no biodiversity, there's nothing." And they said, "Oh, what do you know? You don't know a thing, a consultant subsidies, etc." Okay? And then while I was there, a file comes across my desk. It is to release 25,000 acres of land in the Maduro area to Guthrie Corporation, a Malaysian oil palm corporation, for irrigated oil palm. I said, "Nothing doing. I will not allow this. This is against the people of my country." The secretary comes to me and says, Nanda Bevikrama comes to me and says, "Ranil, you're only a consultant. Sign that. The minister's friends. The minister wants it done." Gamini, who was also my friend, Zanaga, he had some deal with these fellows. I said, "Nothing doing. I'm not going to sign this. Stopped it." And I said, "Let somebody else do it." I went to the Canadians, I spoke to them and said, "Environmentally speaking, what are you guys doing?" They stopped it. As a consequence, I was bad-mouthed in Parliament. "Oh, that fellow has nothing except a postal degree," etc. Thrown out of my employment, cars were taken, nothing. I was sitting down without anything. And then I thought, okay, in that case, I put my money where my mouth was. And that's when I went looking for a piece of bare land where I could demonstrate what I was saying in my words. So then I set up Belipola, and that now, 35 years later, is where analog forestry arose from. Today it's an international network. The headquarters in Costa Rica, 20 other countries are doing it. I have people from all over the world coming to study analog forestry there. But up to today,
the government has not consulted you.
I have not had one person from the forest department, wildlife department, or agriculture department come there. And here we are in Sri Lanka. I'm watching my country. I'm watching the policies of my country and the bureaucrats of my country. And what can I do except create the example
that you want to be? Ranil, what are some of the critical indicators, biomarkers that we can look at to understand how grave our environmental crisis is right now? Loss of green cover, soil.
Loss of our topsoil.
Topsoil.
When the British came, before the Colebrook Commission, which declared uninhabited land as wasteland, and the wasteland ordinance came into being, our mountains were closed in forest. Those forests had a topsoil which was so incredible that in that topsoil, you see, there were in Sri Lanka 16 species of earth snakes. Earth snakes are like whales to an ocean, to a soil. They are the huge organisms of the soil. We had 16 species of this. It suggested that our mountains were like oceans of great antiquity because nobody went there, nobody cleared this. Well, with the Coalbrook Commission and the British coming and the plantation economy, there went our forests.
Made way to all the tea plantations.
Indeed, first to coffee, then to
And
tea, then to rubber, etc., etc. Right. Along with that went all that topsoil, which was the thing that was possible to give us the dynamic of agriculture, because in 15 centimeters of living topsoil, you have at least 10 horsepower of bacterial energy working day and night. That is the energy that our forefathers had for the last X thousand years for agriculture, before the Green Revolution came into being and before they wiped the soil out of our forests. Right. Our mountain forests then lost the soils, and then now we have to now keep putting on fertilizers constantly every year in order to keep that productive. It's not really that. But with the loss of the topsoil, with the retention of water, because 1% of increase in the soil organic matter means 20,000 gallons of water per hectare can be held by the soil. None of this was considered, and even today is not considered as a part of the developments that we require to move forward. So yeah, we are in serious trouble right now, and everybody got their heads in the sand like an ostrich, saying it'll go away. It will not go away. Our nation will get sicker and poorer, and there's no way any industry or any external force is going to help us unless we help ourselves.
We haven't even touched on issues like salinization.
Oh God!
Briefly, I'm sure our viewers will be very interested to know the shape and form of that problem that is quite imminent.
It's happening right now. I mean, I have gone, for 6 years we've been telling the government, for God's sake, we know that sea level rise is a factor. We know that salt intrusion is going to happen, and all of our rice fields on the coast is going to be salinated. Now, Bangladesh has salt-resistant varieties of rice. China has salt-resistant varieties of rice. But has our government made any move to get those varieties, get it ready, and get ready for the debacle that's before us? No. Bureaucrats are going for the COP here, COP there, COP. Yeah. That's what we get today.
Often we talk about strengthening institutions. The EPA has a critical role to play, at least on paper.
What's the EPA?
The Environmental Protection Authority. I'm sure that was sarcasm. but yes, Ranil, how do you see their role? Is it possible to improve what they're doing?
God knows. I'm a test. Now, when I go back, I'm going to take the Geological and Mine Survey to court. I'm going to take them to court because there is a Galwala rock quarry, right, next to Bellipala that they're blasting and they're destroying that whole area, right? But because the bureaucrats are, money changing hands, right, these things we stopped it once, it won't also happen again. So you can't fight these bureaucrats. The only way I thought is take them to court, That's
an interesting point you make, Ranil, and I'd like to put this question to all of you. Public interest litigation, is that a way forward for us?
Yes.
To follow the example of India,
yes.
Perhaps
That's
we have the research. There's so much of information that is available,
sure.
But when it hits those bureaucrats, they just seem to get filed away
Yeah, that's what
and
happened.
lost in limbo.
Yeah.
What can we do about that? Public interest litigation,
Take him
perhaps?
to- I said, take him to court. Sue the guys out there.
Yeah, the point is, we have been basically stressing this point. Evidence-based policy making, evidence-based interventions. That's what, we are all saying. Whether it's from an economic point of view, whether it is from an ecological point of view, whether it is from a sociological point of view. The point is, at the end of the day, whether we take evidence seriously, whether we want to be guided by evidence. But the point here is that in Sri Lanka, we have had a major, process of transformation spanning over 4 decades. One major part of that, I think, is also brain drain. Sri Lanka, I have seen it from my undergraduate days. My own professor left when I was in the second year. Now, he was such a vibrant, academic. And I thought, well, this is really the source of wisdom. And I would spend the next few years,
Aspiring.
being inspired by him. But, so the point is that was even before liberalization in 1977. But now, so the point is that we have to also think about why people leave. And of course, there can be two explanations. One is, of course, what he is saying, the resistance to, let's say, people with knowledge and, experience and so on. So, but the other, of course, is, the whole world has undergone this massive transformation. The point is, we are living, we talked about globalization, right? Before globalization, we had liberalism, but then it was within the state, nation-state framework. But the point is that under neoliberalism, what happened was that the state had to, not only withdraw, allowing the market to take, precedence over everything else, and also, basically transcending the national boundary, so that you have lot of things happening transnationally. Lot of what is happening is not within countries, but transnational. So I think this is that is the kind of larger picture that is very, very visible to every one of us. But the point is that knowledge, I think, is critical, and it was valued. Knowledge and wisdom. That is what really people valued. And they looked up to people with knowledge and wisdom. But the point is that in Sri Lanka, we have moved away from that thinking, and we are basically sort of driven by, our personal, interest. Right?
Interest.
What is there for me now? Being a politician, he or she might think that, look, what is there for me now? Right? Of course, he talked about, the first Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. You see, the point is that we have come a long way. Now the question is, how can we restore what we have lost? He's talking about, restoring the ecological balance. Now I'm talking about it from a way broader perspective, So the point is that we have to learn from what we have, experience, knowledge that is being generated. And so the point is that knowledge is not just in one place.
Will the government listen?
This is exactly the point. I think that is.
How do we make them listen?
I think
because we're talking about.
I think we have. I can. When I read, what has been happening in Sri Lanka, we have an opening. And I think it is that opening that we have to use. And I think if we sit back and relax, it won't happen. And we have to be part of this process of revival. If possible, I think we should, try to get ourselves organized, not just nationally, but internationally. And I think the transnational, solidarity, I think that is the name of the game for Sri Lanka today. And because we have so many of our people,
scattered
doing very well,
globally.
doing very well in the rest of the world. And they have an affinity, and they have a concern. And they did not leave because they wanted to run away. Though they left because of certain circumstances beyond their control. So the point is, this is now the point where we have to figure out how can we really, get all the resources that we can, mobilize, not just, material resources, they're very important, but also the intellectual resources. And I think if we can really make use of this opportunity and really get home this message across to, as many people as well, including the people, I think what we lost, I think has to be, basically,
restored,
and the people should know that we have lost so much. And I think that is really what we should do. And I hope that we would, certainly have a momentum now without waiting for too long. And I think it's again another low-hanging fruit. So I would say that while reaching out to the, the periphery and taking care of those people who really help the transformation, it is, if not for these people, and when you look at the electoral map, you will see that. And you would see 60%, 65% of the people in some of the remote areas voted in favor of the present government. Not the enlightened, middle class elite in Colombo.
Ranil?
So
what I was pointing out here is more than that. We need a new way forward. The same old formula, however we package it, will not work because we are dependent on external factors.
Yeah.
But we have a new wealth that we can create, and that's what we've been working on for the past 6 years, and that is the oxygen economy. It's a new economy. It's totally different to what's going on. You heard of the carbon economy? Well, that is offsetting something. Oxygen economy is onsetting. Now in Sri Lanka, the research has been done. The war widows in Chedikulam, those ladies proved everything that there was about the oxygen economy. The Prime Minister has come and rewarded these ladies. It was mentioned now in Sri Lankan Parliament. The International Committee just beginning to realize it. If we move in this direction, there is an opportunity for Sri Lanka to rise out of the mess by creating wealth in our country, and creating wealth using the rural sector and using the whole question of primary ecosystem services, valuing the primary ecosystem services and marketing those services in the international market. We are just setting this out. I'd invite anybody who's interested, please go to our webpage, restore.earth. The whole process has begun from Sri Lanka. We are the first country in the world. And if the government takes cognizance, this government, of what we have done in 3 years, we will get out of the mess that we are in.
Thanks, Ranil. Speaking of biocurrency, I think viewers might be, it could be helped if, Professor, you can give a brief explanation on what biocurrency is and how these paradigms can be explored as options when we are talking about sustainable development.
Yeah, actually, the biocurrency idea, he was promoting that, so I think you better explain.
Professor, I mean, basically the fact is this, right? We have to look at something that is recognized by the world as having value. Okay. Ecosystem services, that is, have been looked at for the last 20 years, Robert Constanza and all the publications, right? And they have pointed out that the value of the ecosystem services on this planet in today's terms is something like $178 trillion annually. But we have still to look for a way to capitalize on that. What I'm suggesting is that in Sri Lanka, we have looked at a section of it, primary ecosystem service. What is that? The thing that begins all of life, all of us, and that is photosynthesis. The living leaf of a plant does the photosynthesis, and that is the first ecosystem service. That happens around the world. When we step out, there are plants, there's grass, everything. That is the global commons. Belongs to everybody. It cannot be privatized. It's the global commons. We breathe, you breathe from it, he breathes, we breathe from it. It's for all of us.
Have you taken your idea to the government, Ranit?
Not yet.
I'm
doing it myself. I want people to come to me. When I'm doing something, does it work? Ask the question, I will answer. I don't want to go behind somebody with, oh, please, look at this. No. They should be interested in the nation. If they're interested in the nation, they should find out, hey, that guy's been there for 35 years doing, what has he? When I was in Cuba doing this, unfortunately, I was on my way out in Europe when I got the call from our embassy saying, Ryan, come back. I said, I can't. I said, why? He said, Fidel wants to meet you. Now, here was a leader who was constantly looking at what happens in his country. Anything interesting? I want to know.
And you don't see that?
35 years I've been working.
You have not seen that?
Yeah. Fidel saw it immediately, right? But this is a tragedy of where we are.
Well, our national resource is our environment, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's what we have, isn't it? And if there's a way forward to explore some of these ideas, I think
we can unlock this wealth.
I think we need a discourse that overrides these petty discourses that have been going around. I think the point is we have come to a point when we can't be playing around anymore, and I think we have to face it. I think it is absolutely necessary that we really use whatever the opportunity that we have, whatever the opening we have, to really get these ideas across to as many people as possible, because it's not just giving advice to it's not a person to person interaction. I think the point is, I think it is at the end of the day the public discourse that matters. You see, I think in Sri Lanka it is the public discourse that brought about the change.
It did.
And we all contributed to it. I mean,
we all stood in solidarity.
It has been a massive struggle. I mean, on this sustainable development thing, I mean, we established a Sustainable Development Council in 2017, and we basically sort of mobilized some of the people who were around, and I was also involved in it. And actually, we came up with a base document, sustainable development vision document. And there might be all kinds of, weaknesses and faults and all these things. But the point is that we mobilize as many people as we could at that point who were around the country. And they were, spending about 6 months sitting around the table, together, in small groups and so on and so on. Finally, we put that together. But that's a kind of a very broad-based document. But the point is, you have to come up with it. But the question is, there are so many such documents. I have been part of so many presidential commissions, so many presidential committees, so many task forces. And this is what we have been doing. We have been coming out with, various strategic papers, policy papers, and so on. I can give you many examples. But the fact of the matter is that they are all lying, gathering dust in different institutions. I mean, this is exactly the tragedy of this country. The point is not that the people had no ideas, not that people were not willing to come out, not that people wanted to spend time, for the sake of the country and the people and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that it did not click. So I mean, like for instance, we had, there was a presidential commission on local government reform. We are talking about deepening of democracy, right? The participatory democracy. I mean, all these ideas. But if you get hold of that report, published in 1998, and I was a member, and I was responsible for writing some of the parts of. The point is that the point is revamping the local government sector is so critical, because you can't manage things from Colombo. So the fact of the matter is that not even people looked at it. You see, the point is that there is so much knowledge, so much experience, so much idea, embedded in so many documents running over 3-4 decades. Now the point is, we are just going past those documents, and we come up with something new. So I think the point is that we have to say enough is enough. I think we'll have to get on with it. And I think we are now not young anymore. We are quite old now. But the fact of the matter is that I think we have to give this message to younger generation, and I think they have to take over.
Let me tell you something in that context,
Yeah.
right? And that is, I plant forests. I grow forests. When I step out, I carry a forest in my hands, all the seeds. I know that when I plant those seeds, eventually that will become a forest.
Yeah.
And I know that I will never see it. I'll be dead and gone. Our duty is to plant these seeds.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that society can take it and grow.
I'm fully with you, and that is why even at this stage I'm running around and
Exactly.
trying to do what I can.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we have to do, because we are here doing what we have done, what we are doing, and what we have achieved in whatever way that we want to describe it, is because the people in that country basically sustained us, provided the opportunities. And I think we have to somehow, I'm not saying pay him back, but it is social solidarity. I mean, I'm a sociologist, and I want to emphasize this. It is that would really make the difference in many
I
societies.
tell you what is really important in that is our tradition of Kelehi Guna Salakim. Now, that happened to me here in Australia because I was a part of the Centre for Farm Planning and Land Management at Melbourne Uni, and we were sent around Australia to tell the farmers what their granddad did was wrong because their salinisation, acidification, compaction of Australian farmland was really getting impacted badly. And I had to tell the farmers that what their dad did was wrong, or what their granddad did was wrong, we got to change. I often, when I stand before them at a meeting, I say, I'm from Sri Lanka, I'm a new Australian, and I'm here because of a saying we have at home. It's called Kelehi Salakima. What is that? Attending to the good that was done to you.
Yeah.
Australia, this land, sustains me, feeds my children, feeds my family. I have a debt of obligation by this land to ensure that it improves.
Gratitude.
That is
Gratitude. Gratitude to the land that nourishes you.
There you
Gratitude
go. There you go.
to the people that have been there for you. We stand in
Right.
solidarity. On that
Right.
note, we would like to end this fantastic discussion. Thank you, one and all,
Surely.
for joining. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.